A few years ago, Jasmine Crockett stood on the edge of disappearing, quietly, without drama, without goodbye. But tonight she sat across from Steve Harvey under studio lights, the man whose long-forgotten words once pulled her back from that silence. No one in the audience laughed. No one dared to breathe. When she read those words back to him, it wasn't gratitude, it was redemption. And in that moment, the man who unknowingly saved a life realized he'd just been saved by it. What did she say that brought an entire room to tears and changed the man at the center of it forever? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The lights dimmed gently and the familiar theme music drifted in, not loud or dramatic, but warm and comforting, like a welcome mat rolled out across the air. The cameras floated over a smiling audience, faces relaxed, hands mid-clap, the room aglow with expectation. It was the kind of energy that only live television could create, part excitement, part curiosity, part comfort. Then from behind the curtain, Steve Harvey stepped into the light. He moved with the ease of a man who had long ago made peace with the stage. His black suit was simple, well-fitted, the kind you don't notice because it belongs so naturally to him. His smile appeared as it always did, half grin, half message. "You're in good hands." He paused just long enough for the audience to settle before speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said warmly, his voice smooth as honey over oak. "Our guest tonight may be petite in size, but when she speaks, trust me, every room listens. Please welcome Representative Jasmine Crockett." The crowd clapped enthusiastically as the doors opened once more. Jasmine stepped out with grace, not overly formal, not trying to impress, just present. She wore a crisp white blazer over dark slacks, her natural hair styled with intention but not extravagance. Her stride was steady, confident, and the smile on her face was bright. But Steve, who had seen thousands walk out onto that stage, noticed something behind it, something quieter, something careful. As Jasmine approached, Steve stepped forward with genuine warmth. "Welcome to the show, Congresswoman," he said, offering his hand with a smile that didn't need to be forced. "We're really glad you're here." "Thank you, Steve," Jasmine replied, her voice soft but assured. "It's good to be here." They took their seats, a gentle back and forth beginning almost immediately. They joked about Texas heat and long days on the Hill, the kind of banter that draws in an audience without trying too hard. But even as the crowd laughed and the rhythm found its flow, Steve kept glancing at Jasmine, noticing how every now and then her smile would fade just a second too soon, how her hands, though relaxed, sometimes clenched briefly in her lap. She was present, yes, but something was held back. Not out of fear, not out of pride. Something quieter than either of those. A story waiting to be told when the moment was safe enough. After a few warm, familiar questions about her district, about how she got into politics, Steve slowly set the cue cards aside. He didn't say it, but something in his body language told the room. "Now we're going deeper." He leaned in slightly, his hands folded gently, voice a little lower now. "Let me ask you something real," he said. "What's something that almost made you walk away? Not years ago, I mean lately. What got you that close to giving it all up?" There was a pause. Jasmine didn't flinch, but her eyes dropped just for a second. The usual poise she carried so naturally shifted. Barely, but enough for anyone really paying attention to notice. Her hands folded in her lap. She took a slow breath in through her nose, then looked up at Steve. Her voice was calm, but soft, like someone speaking words they've only ever said to themselves. "I wrote a resignation letter," she said. It didn't land like a punch. It landed like a slow weight on the room. Something about the way she said it made everyone stop, made them listen. Steve didn't react right away. He just looked at her and asked gently, "Why?" Jasmine took another breath, deeper this time. Her voice stayed low, but it carried more now. More of her, more of what she'd been holding in. "Because I felt like I was disappearing," she said. "I was going to work, doing the job, doing everything people expected of me, and still it felt like I was slowly fading away. And no one noticed. Not one person stopped to ask if I was okay. Not really. She shook her head, just slightly. I was showing up every day, giving everything I had, and I still felt like I wasn't seen. Not as a person, just a title, a role, something to point at, talk about, debate, but not someone people actually looked at. The audience was quiet. Steve sat still. Jasmine continued, her words coming easier now, but not lighter. There were nights I'd come home, kick off my shoes, sit on the edge of the bed, and just sit there. No music, no TV, just sitting in silence. Not because I wanted peace, but because I didn't even know what I needed anymore. I didn't feel like myself. I was pretending so much. Pretending to be strong, pretending I wasn't tired, pretending the things they said didn't bother me. She stopped, blinking slowly. Then she looked right at Steve. I didn't write that letter because I wanted to quit, she said. I wrote it because I didn't know how much longer I could keep pretending I was okay. Her voice stayed even, but something in it cracked, not from weakness, but from honesty. I was tired, Steve. Not tired from working hard. I've done that my whole life. I was tired from being judged every time I opened my mouth, from being told to calm down, to watch my tone, to act more professional, when all I was doing was telling the truth. I was tired of being told I was too much, and also not enough, sometimes in the same breath. She shook her head again, a sad smile flashing for half a second. I wrote that letter at my kitchen table, she said, after a long day where nothing bad happened, just the usual. The looks, the comments, the way I had to fight to be taken seriously again. And I thought, if this is what success looks like, why do I feel so empty? She paused. The studio felt smaller now, closer, like everyone was sitting at that kitchen table with her. I love what I do, she said. I really do. That's why it hurt so much. I didn't want to leave. I just didn't know how much longer I could keep showing up while losing myself a little more every day. I felt like I was becoming invisible, and it scared me. Steve didn't say a word. His face said enough. Jasmine nodded slightly, grounding herself. The hardest part, she added, no one saw it. Or maybe they did, and just figured I'd be fine, that I'd keep pushing through like I always do. But I was breaking, quietly, and I didn't want to break all the way before anyone noticed. Her voice fell to a whisper, not dramatic, just truthful. So when you ask why I almost walked away, it wasn't because I stopped caring. It was because I cared too much, and I was losing myself trying to carry it all alone. And for a moment, nothing moved. Not a breath, not a camera, not even Steve, because she wasn't giving a speech. She was finally being heard. But sometimes even being heard isn't enough to hold you together, because the hardest nights aren't the ones you talk about. They're the ones you survive alone, with no one watching and no one knowing just how close you came to disappearing. She didn't talk about that night for a long time, not because she was hiding it, but because she didn't know how to explain it without sounding dramatic. It didn't feel dramatic when it happened. It felt slow, heavy, like sinking. That day had started like any other. Long meetings, harsh headlines, polite insults from people who shook her hand in front of cameras and rolled their eyes when she walked away. The kind of day that wears you down in little pieces until you forget you're breaking. When the last meeting ended, she didn't go home. She just walked, no umbrella, no bag, just her and the rain. At first it was a light mist, cold but bearable. Then the clouds opened up, and the sky poured without warning. She didn't run for cover. She didn't even flinch. Her coat soaked through, her shoes squished with every step, but she kept walking. Because for once, the outside matched how she felt inside. Drenched, heavy, and quiet. Streetlights blurred into soft golden halos as the water streamed down her face. She blinked again and again, but couldn't tell if the wetness on her cheeks came from the sky or her own eyes. It didn't matter. Her body kept moving forward. But her mind, it was somewhere else entirely. Not thinking, not planning, just drifting. She passed people. Strangers under umbrellas, couples huddled under awnings, cars rushing by, but none of them looked her way. And that hit her harder than any insult, She was soaked to the skin, walking alone through a storm, and still invisible. Eventually, she ended up in her car. She couldn't even remember walking to it. It was just there. She got in, closed the door, and sat in the driver's seat like it was the only safe space left in the world. Rain hit the windshield in steady waves. The wind pushed against the doors, but inside everything was still. Too still. She didn't turn on the engine, didn't adjust the radio, just stared out at the water, dark and quiet, stretching out in front of her like a mirror that refused to reflect. The lake didn't move, neither did she. Her phone was in her hand, glowing softly in the dim light. The screen showed a message, a text that hadn't been sent, a single sentence she'd typed without really realizing it. If I died tonight and disappeared, would anyone even notice? She looked at those words for a long time. Her thumb hovered over the send button, just slightly. It didn't tremble much, but enough. Enough to make her realize how close she was, not to doing anything reckless, but to feeling nothing at all. That was the part that scared her. Not sadness, not fear, but the emptiness. The silence inside that felt louder than any noise she'd ever known. Like her voice had gone missing. Like she had too. She thought about sending it, just to one person. Just to see if anyone would answer. Not with advice, not with inspiration, just with something real, something human. But even that felt too far away, too hard to reach for. She stared at the screen, her reflection faint in the glass, and whispered to herself. Not out loud, just in her head. I don't want to feel like this anymore. She didn't send the message. She just let the phone fall into her lap, the screen still glowing. The question stayed there, unanswered. But before she could close the app, before she could shut it all down, something else appeared. Something small, something unexpected. And that's when everything began to shift. She wasn't trying to be dramatic. She wasn't even trying to feel better. She just needed something, anything to fill the space. The silence in the car felt too loud, and her own thoughts were circling the same painful loop. What am I even doing anymore? How did I get this tired? Why does none of it feel like enough? She opened her phone out of habit, the way people do when they don't want to be alone with their own mind. She didn't want to text anyone, didn't want to scroll through social media and see fake smiles or motivational quotes that meant nothing to her in that moment. So she tapped on YouTube. It felt mindless, safe, empty. Her thumb drifted across the screen, scrolling past video after video, headlines, comedians, political debates, makeup tutorials. Nothing registered. It was like watching noise pass by on a conveyor belt. She didn't care about any of it. Not tonight. Her eyes weren't even really focusing until one image stopped her. Just for a second. A simple thumbnail. Steve Harvey standing alone on a dimly lit stage. One hand holding a mic, the other resting on his chest like he was trying to hold something in. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't joking. The title underneath read, "If you're breathing, God's not done with you yet." She stared at it. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the title. Maybe it was the way he looked. Still, serious. Like someone who had been through something. Or maybe it was something quieter. Something inside her that recognized itself in the way he stood there. Either way, she tapped it. The video opened with no flashy graphics, no music, no applause. Just Steve, alone on the stage, speaking calmly into a microphone. His voice was low and steady, like he was talking to one person, not a crowd. Like he was talking to her. "If you woke up this morning," he said, "that means God's not done with you yet." She didn't move. For a second, she wasn't even sure she had heard it right. She paused the video, rewound it 10 seconds, played it again. "If you woke up this morning, God's not done with you yet." The words sank in slowly. Not all at once, like a revelation. More like water seeping through a wall that had been holding for too long. She sat up straighter, her body suddenly alert, even as her chest stayed heavy. She whispered the sentence to herself softly. "God's not done with you yet." It didn't solve anything, but it didn't feel fake either. It felt honest. like something she hadn't heard in a long time, something she didn't know she needed until that moment. She let the video continue. Then Steve said something else, something simple, but it landed like a punch to the chest. Success without peace of mind is just a well-paid hell. That line didn't echo, it exploded. Her breath caught, her throat closed. It was like something inside her cracked wide open. And before she could stop it, the tears came. Fast, hard, not graceful, not quiet. They poured out of her like she'd been holding them back for months. She leaned forward in the seat, hands gripping the steering wheel, her forehead pressed to the top of it. Her whole body shook. It wasn't the kind of cry where you need someone to hold you. It was the kind where you finally realize you've been carrying too much for too long and you just don't know how to put it down. She looked at the phone again through blurry eyes, Steve's face frozen on the screen, caught mid-sentence. She stared at it, then whispered, her voice broken and shaky. Who wrote this? How does he know exactly what I'm feeling? And then louder, to no one in particular. How does he know? It wasn't anger. It was disbelief. The kind of raw confusion that comes when something outside you perfectly describes what's been locked inside. Her hands trembled in her lap, the phone resting face up on the passenger seat. The rain tapped lightly on the windshield now, a soft reminder that the world was still moving, even if she felt like she wasn't. She didn't cry because of the pain. She cried because someone, somehow, had finally put it into words. Words she didn't even know she needed. Not a therapist, not a politician, not a friend with good intentions. Just a man with a microphone, standing on a stage, saying the exact thing she needed to hear at the exact moment she needed it. And in that moment, something small but important shifted. She didn't feel healed. She didn't feel fixed. But she felt seen, and that alone made it a little easier to breathe. The lights on the stage hadn't changed, but everything else had. The energy, the air, the silence in the room felt different now, full, not empty. Jasmine's voice had dropped, like she was no longer speaking to the crowd or even to Steve. She was speaking from a place so personal that even she seemed surprised by how deep she had gone. That night, she said softly, I didn't send the message. She paused. Her eyes didn't move, but her breath did, shaky, like it took effort to hold this memory steady. I played your video again, just once more, and then I don't even remember falling asleep. I just stopped. The tears didn't stop. The pain didn't stop. But something inside me let go, and I finally closed my eyes. I hadn't done that in days. The audience didn't react, not because they weren't moved, but because they were frozen, like a collective breath being held. Steve sat completely still, his hands clasped tight between his knees, elbows resting forward. His body leaned in, not to ask, not to comfort, but to witness. He was listening with every part of him. His mouth didn't open. His eyes, though red-rimmed and tired-looking now, stayed locked on Jasmine's face like she might disappear if he looked away. I didn't fall asleep because I was okay, she said, blinking slowly. I fell asleep because, for the first time in a long time, something made me believe maybe I didn't have to carry everything by myself. That one line, if you're breathing, God's not done with you yet. It didn't sound like motivation. It didn't sound like a speech. It sounded like someone finally saw me, not the version on TV, not the headlines. Me. Her voice started to break. Not loud, just barely enough to feel it, a soft tremor under the words. You didn't know me, she continued, but somehow you said the exact thing I needed to hear at the exact moment I needed it. I was sitting there, in the dark, in my car, thinking maybe I didn't matter anymore. And then this video shows up, just you, just your voice, saying, you woke up today, so you're not done. She looked down for a second, her hands now resting quietly in her lap, as if remembering the weight of that moment. You have no idea, she said, her voice now a whisper. But that sentence, it saved my life. Her words fell into the silence like a stone into still water. No splash, just ripples that reached every person in the room. Steve didn't respond right away. His lips pressed together gently, his head lowered slightly, not in shame, not in shock, but in reverence. His eyes shut for just a second, like he was praying without saying a word. When he looked back up, his face was softer, older somehow, holding back something bigger than emotion. Responsibility, maybe, or awe. A single tear fell down his cheek. He didn't move to wipe it away. It slid down slowly, past his mustache, down to his clasped hands and landed there. Still, he didn't speak. There was nothing to say. When someone tells you that words you didn't even remember saying gave them a reason to live, there is no script for that, only silence, and the sound of a tear hitting skin. And that was all they needed. Steve was quiet for a long time. His head tilted down slightly, like the words were forming somewhere deep, and he had to be careful pulling them out. His hands were still clenched together, fingers woven tight, resting on his knees like they were holding him up from the inside. The studio lights hadn't changed, but the moment had. The room was no longer a stage. It was something smaller, something sacred. Then finally Steve spoke, softly, like he wasn't talking to the audience anymore, but to a memory only he could see. "There was a time in my life," he said, "when I didn't have a house, didn't have a real job, didn't even have a room I could lock behind me and feel safe in." He looked up, not at Jasmine, not at the crowd, but at some point just above the cameras. His voice was calm, not shaky, not angry, just honest. "I lived in my car for 3 years. The air shifted. The sentence dropped into the room like a weight no one was prepared to hold. Steve let it sit there. He didn't rush. He didn't try to soften it. 3 years, Orin," he repeated, "sleeping in the back of a 1976 Ford Tempo. A car so small I had to curl my legs up just to stretch out. My clothes stayed in the trunk. My shoes were lined up under the front seat. I'd park in rest stops, church lots, gas stations, any place that wouldn't call the cops. I learned which fast food places let you use the bathroom without buying anything. I kept a towel with me, not just to dry off, but to put in the window so nobody could see inside when I changed." He looked at his hands, then slowly back up. There was a distant pain in his eyes, not fresh, but never fully gone. "And people? They didn't know. I'd still show up to do gigs when I could get them. I'd stand on stage, make people laugh, put on that smile like everything was good. But 5 minutes before, I'd been crying in the parking lot, wiping my face with a napkin from a gas station, talking to myself, trying to find the strength to walk into that building like I wasn't falling apart inside." He paused again. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full of truth that had been waiting years to be spoken out loud. "There was one morning," he said, voice lower now. "I was sitting in the car. It was cold. I remember because my breath was fogging up the window, and I didn't have enough gas to turn the heat on. My daughter was coming to visit. She was 5. I had $7 in my pocket. That's it. 7. I looked over and saw this crumpled granola bar wrapper in the glove box. Just one bar left. And I sat there for 20 minutes trying to decide, should I eat it or should I save it for her?" He blinked slowly, his eyes wet now, but holding the tears in place. "I didn't cry because I was broke," he said. "I cried because I didn't know what kind of father I was if I couldn't even feed my little girl. I felt like a failure. Not on TV, not in the news, in my own skin. That kind of pain? It doesn't make noise, it just sits with you. Quiet, heavy." His voice softened even more. "I remember thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe this is just what my life is going to be. Sleeping in this car, hoping for a gig, praying nobody sees how broken I really am. And that morning, that was the first time I thought, maybe I don't have it in me to keep going. Not because I didn't love my daughter, but because I didn't see a way out. I didn't see me anymore." Jasmine hadn't spoken. She hadn't moved. Her eyes were filled with tears again, not because his story shocked her, but because she understood it more than she wanted to. Steve looked at her, really looked. For the first time that night, there was no host, no guest, no lights, no cameras. Just two people who had once sat in a car, separately, in different cities, under different skies, but who had both asked themselves the same quiet question. How much longer can I do this? And now somehow, they were here, still breathing, still standing. And for a moment, in that studio filled with silence, it felt like the world had finally stopped long enough to let two broken hearts tell the truth. Just as the quiet between them seemed to settle, like a shared wound finally given space to breathe, Jasmine reached into the inside pocket of her blazer. The movement was small, almost unnoticeable, but it drew the room's attention instantly. Her hands were slow, deliberate, like she was handling something fragile. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, creased at the corners, its folds worn and soft like fabric. It wasn't new. It had been held many times. She didn't look at it right away. She just held it in her palm for a moment, eyes on Steve, her breath steady but tight. "This," she said gently, "has been taped to my bathroom mirror every single day for the last 2 years." Her voice was quiet, but her tone was unshakable. The kind of voice that comes from someone who's been holding on to something for a long, long time and is finally ready to release it. She unfolded the paper slowly, smoothing it out on her lap with fingers that trembled just a little. Then she read the words out loud, not to perform them, but to honor them. "Silence doesn't mean you've lost. Sometimes it's just how the soul comes back to life." The room didn't move. It didn't need to. Steve blinked slowly. His expression shifted, not with recognition, but with a kind of stunned softness, like hearing a voice from the past you forgot was your own. His lips parted, his brow furrowed. "Wait," he said, almost under his breath. I, I said that?" Jasmine nodded, her eyes starting to glisten again, but she didn't look away. "You did," she said. "You said it in a clip, years ago, late at night. You were just talking to a crowd. It probably didn't feel like anything big to you. But to me, I wrote it down. I folded it up. I taped it to my mirror. And I read it every morning when I felt like disappearing. When I needed something that didn't ask me to be strong, just to be here." She looked at the paper again, then back at Steve. "I can't even tell you how many mornings that quote kept me going. Not because it told me to fight, but because it told me it was okay to be quiet, to be still, to not have it all together, to just breathe." Steve's hand, still clasped in front of him, slowly opened. He didn't reach. He didn't ask. But Jasmine leaned forward and placed the paper into his palm, folding his fingers gently over it. "But tonight," she said, her voice breaking just slightly, "I think it's your turn, because somewhere along the way, I think you forgot what it meant, and you need it now more than I do." Steve looked down at his hand, still closed over the paper. His throat moved as he swallowed hard. No words came, just a tear that slid silently down his cheek, landing on the back of his hand, right where her note now rested. He didn't try to speak. He just nodded, slowly, gratefully, because sometimes the words we give to save others are the same ones that end up saving us. The quiet after Jasmine handed Steve that paper wasn't like the silences earlier. This one felt thick, almost sacred. It wrapped around the room like a blanket, not heavy, but grounding. Steve sat with the folded note still resting in his hand, staring down at it. He didn't say a word, and he didn't move for several long seconds. He just breathed. His fingers slowly curled around the paper, not like he was gripping it, but like he was protecting it, holding on to something fragile and real. Then he stood. There was no music, no signal from the crew, no glance at the teleprompter. Just a quiet, instinctive rise, as if something inside him told him this wasn't a moment to sit through. This was a moment to stand in. His eyes scanned the room briefly, but not as a host checking the crowd. He looked at them like a man who had just remembered he wasn't alone, that none of them were. His voice came, low but grounded. No performance in it. Just a full heart, speaking plain. "Everybody," he said, pausing just long enough to shift the energy in the room, "I think we need to do something right now." He turned and reached for Jasmine's hand. She looked at him, a little surprised at first, but there was no question in her eyes. She knew. She stood with him, and he gently took her hand in both of his. Then, in a movement that seemed to come from someplace far deeper than habit, Steve bowed his head. He didn't say anything else, didn't tell the audience what to do, but they knew. One by one, they rose from their seats. No clapping, no phones held up, just stillness. rising, just people, standing. It wasn't about the stage anymore. It wasn't about titles or roles or stories. It was something far quieter and far more powerful. No one spoke. No one whispered. Every person in that studio simply bowed their heads. It didn't feel like a tribute. It felt like truth. Steve kept his head down for a moment longer. Then he looked at Jasmine, his eyes wet again, not from sadness, but from something softer. Something like relief, like remembering something important about himself that he hadn't touched in years. "If my words saved you once," he said, voice quiet but clear enough for the whole room to hear, "then tonight, your tears saved me right back." His voice caught just slightly at the end, not because he was holding back emotion, but because he wasn't. He let it move through him, raw and clean. Jasmine didn't answer. She didn't need to. The way she looked at him, unblinking, steady, present, said everything. For the first time in the entire show, Steve had no joke, no closer, no takeaway. Just this moment, and that was enough. He turned slowly back to the audience. Dozens of faces, eyes closed, hearts open. Not fans, not viewers. Just people. Just human beings caught in a rare kind of stillness. The lights in the studio began to dim. Not suddenly, softly, respectfully. Like the room itself knew the moment was over. Not because it had ended, but because it had given all it came to give. There was no outro music, no credits, no applause. The cameras didn't zoom. They didn't fade out on cue. They just faded. And for the first time in talk show history, the end wasn't about entertainment. It was about awakening. The episode didn't close with a laugh or a standing ovation. It closed with a silence that said, "We saw each other." And somehow, that was more than enough. The lights dimmed slowly. Not like the end of most shows. No flashing transitions, no cheerful theme song. No host smiling into the camera with a punchline. The lights lowered like someone turning down their voice out of respect for a sleeping child. It was soft, unhurried, and deeply intentional. Like the air itself had understood that something sacred had happened and it didn't want to disturb it. And still, no one moved. The audience remained standing, not frozen, not unsure, just still. It wasn't a stage anymore. Not in their eyes. The bright, polished energy of television had melted away. What remained felt like a church with no pews, or a hospital room where healing had just taken place without a single machine. People stood in silence, shoulder to shoulder, eyes lowered or closed, hands held quietly in front of them, like they didn't want to break the spell by even adjusting their coat. Some had tears in their eyes. Some had their heads bowed. Some just stared ahead, not at the stage but through it, like their minds had drifted to something personal, something real, something they hadn't let themselves feel in a very long time. Steve and Jasmine were gone from view, but their presence remained. You could still feel them. You could still feel the moment when the show had stopped being a show and turned into something deeper. When two people had stopped performing and just told the truth. It's hard to explain that kind of silence to someone who wasn't there, because it wasn't empty. It was full. Full of unspoken things, of people quietly revisiting their own moments of almost quitting, their own nights in cars, their own private battles with doubt and worth. People didn't just watch a conversation, they saw themselves in it. And now no one wanted to be the first to turn away. A woman in her 50s stood in the fourth row, clutching her purse against her chest like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Her makeup had smudged, but she didn't wipe her tears. A few seats over, a man in a navy suit had his hands clasped in front of him, eyes squeezed shut, lips moving softly. Maybe a prayer. Maybe a thank you. Maybe both. The cameras had stopped rolling, but no one moved to power down the room. It was like the crew was in it too. The sound tech had stepped away from the board, arms folded over his chest, just staring quietly at the darkened stage. A lighting assistant sat on a stool near the side curtain, hands resting on his knees, as if he wasn't sure whether to stand or sit, so he did neither. One of the producers, normally the first to call wrap and move things along, was just sitting quietly on the steps beside the stage, head in her hands. Not out of stress, out of release. Everyone had come into the studio expecting a show. They got something else. They got reminded of something they didn't even know they were missing. It wasn't just that Jasmine and Steve had shared pain. It was the kind of pain they shared. Quiet pain. The kind most people carry silently for years. The kind you don't talk about at work. The kind you survive with a smile. The kind that doesn't look dramatic, but feels like it's stealing pieces of you, day by day. And suddenly, seeing that pain spoken out loud, named on national television, it broke something and healed something else at the same time. 10 minutes passed, maybe 15, and still no one moved. The first person to sit back down did so gently, like lowering herself into the moment instead of leaving it. Then a few others followed, not out of restlessness, but because their legs were tired from standing, and they weren't ready to leave. Not yet. It wasn't over. Something in them needed to linger. Someone in the front row reached into their pocket and pulled out a phone, but not to scroll, not to record, just to take a picture, not of the stage, of the room, of all these people, still and silent, unified by something invisible but undeniable. There was no buzz, no laughter, no rising murmur, just the occasional deep breath, the shuffle of a foot repositioning, the softest sighs, like the room was exhaling in pieces. Backstage, a crew member peeked through the side curtain, eyes wide. He looked like he didn't want to interrupt whatever was happening, but needed to see it one more time, to make sure it had really happened. He looked out for 5 seconds, maybe 6, then stepped back, shaking his head like someone who had just witnessed something too honest to forget. And still, people stayed. Because what do you do after a moment like that? How do you go back to your regular life when someone just handed you truth with no warning? How do you stand in a room where someone said, "I almost didn't make it," and you felt it like it was your own voice in their mouth? How do you leave a place where no one clapped, but somehow everyone heard the loudest thing they'd ever heard? You don't rush that. You sit in it, you honor it, and that's what they did. Long after the show had ended, the set became a sanctuary. People weren't just audience members anymore. They were witnesses. They had seen something real, and it had seen them back. It would take hours for some of them to find words. Days maybe to tell someone what they just experienced. But deep down they already knew. They had been changed. And not by a message, not by a celebrity, not by a performance, but by something even rarer. 2 people being brave enough to stop performing, to let themselves be seen, to show the cracks, and to remind the rest of us, we're not broken, we're just unfinished. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly where the healing starts. The moment they stepped behind the curtain, the atmosphere changed, but not by much. Backstage was quiet. Not the typical kind of quiet, the efficient buzz of a show, wrapping up where people speak softly into headsets and crew members move with practiced speed. This was a deeper quiet, a silence that had weight to it, like the walls themselves had heard what was said on stage and were still absorbing it. Steve didn't speak, neither did Jasmine. They walked off stage side by side, not looking at each other, not looking at anyone else, just walking. Still inside the moment, still carrying the heaviness of words that were never meant to be said into a microphone, but were said anyway, and had changed everyone in the room because of it. Steve's shoes clicked softly on the smooth hallway floor. Jasmine's heels followed a beat behind. Their steps didn't echo. Everything about this space felt softer now, even the air. Just off to the left, a young production assistant, clipboard in one hand, headset tilted askew, peeked up from his notes as they passed. He didn't say a word. He just stood still, eyes wide like he'd just seen something he didn't know how to process. When Steve caught his gaze, the young man gave the smallest nod. Steve gave a smaller one back. They passed the green room, past the dressing rooms, finally stopped just before the back hallway where the lights were dimmed low, casting everything in a kind of warm twilight glow. It wasn't designed to be dramatic, but somehow it was perfect. Steve leaned his back gently against the wall, exhaled, Jasmine did the same on the opposite side. For a few moments, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. That kind of silence, shared silence, only exists between people who've just gone through something that changed them. Jasmine folded her arms, not in defense, but in containment. She looked like someone who had just opened up so fully that now she needed to gather the pieces of herself again. Not hide them, just hold them, reclaim them. Steve wiped the corner of his eye with his thumb and didn't bother pretending it was for anything other than what it was. Then finally, he broke the silence. His voice wasn't booming like it had been on stage. It was soft, raspy, almost reverent. Been on this stage for decades, he said, not to her, not even fully to himself, just to the space. I've told jokes, hosted legends, shared advice, thought I'd said everything I had to say. He looked up, eyes red-rimmed, but focused now on Jasmine. But tonight I heard something I didn't know I still needed to hear. Jasmine's lips parted, like she wanted to answer but wasn't sure if she should. Then she just said simply, "Me too." Steve tilted his head slightly, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That line," he said, "the one you read, about silence and the soul." She nodded. "I don't even remember saying it," he admitted. "That's what's wild. I must have just been rambling one night. I don't know. I say things, try to speak from the heart, but I never think someone's going to take my words and put them on their mirror." "You weren't rambling," Jasmine said quietly. "You were bleeding." Steve looked at her. "And I recognized it," she added, "because I was bleeding too." They both stood still again. Not awkward, just present, like two people who'd climbed separate mountains, only to find each other at the top, out of breath, scarred, but not alone. A crew member passed slowly down the hallway, pushing a cart of unused props. He didn't say anything either, just glanced at them with a kind of quiet respect, like he didn't want to interrupt what was clearly something larger than TV. Jasmine looked down at her hands. "I didn't know how that moment was going to go. I almost didn't read it, the paper. I thought it would feel cheesy, too dramatic. But when you talked about your car and your daughter and that granola bar, I couldn't hold it in anymore." Steve let out a long, quiet breath. He nodded. "That moment," she continued, her voice softer now, "reminded me why I kept that quote. Not because it made me feel strong, but because it made me feel like it was okay to be not strong, to be tired, to rest." Steve ran his hand over his mouth, processing her words in real time. "I've been carrying a lot too," he said finally. "Even with all the success, even with the name, the money, the lights, some days I still wake up and feel like that man in the car. That version of me never fully left. He just learned how to wear suits and smile." That hit Jasmine in a way she hadn't expected. She took a slow step toward him, then stopped. "We spend so much time surviving," she said. "We forget what it feels like to be safe." Steve nodded again. "Safe ain't always about the room. Sometimes it's just about the person sitting across from you." And then, for the first time since they left the stage, Jasmine smiled. A small, tired, but true smile. "Thank you," she said, "for not looking away." Steve looked at her with equal gravity. "Thank you," he said, "for handing me back something I didn't know I'd lost." They both fell quiet again. A minute passed, maybe two, and then Steve pulled the folded paper from his pocket. He held it up gently, looked at it, then looked back at Jasmine. "I'm gonna frame this," he said. She laughed lightly. "Don't put it next to your Emmys." "That'd be weird." He grinned. "Nah, gonna hang it next to my mirror." She tilted her head. "You still look in the mirror, huh?" Steve smiled, the kind of smile that carried both sadness and humor. "Every day. I just stopped seeing myself for a while." Jasmine nodded, her expression warm and steady. "Then tonight, maybe you saw a little more." They stood for a moment longer, not because there was more to say, but because they didn't want to break the quiet just yet. Something in the air still held them there, something unfinished but healing. A soft knock came on the doorframe. One of the producers, eyes glassy, gave them both a gentle smile. "We're good to go whenever you're ready," she said, No rush. Steve glanced at Jasmine. She gave a small nod, and then together, without saying a word, they turned toward the hallway, not just to leave, but to walk forward. Still breathing, still changed, still human. The episode aired only once, on a Wednesday night when ratings analysts predicted modest numbers and advertisers had nothing special to promote. The network slotted it into the usual hour and expected the usual outcome. A pleasant bump from Steve Harvey's loyal audience, a handful of social media clips, a news cycle mention or two, and then on to the next show. They were wrong from the first minute. By the time the credits silently scrolled over a dark screen, phones were already buzzing in living rooms, text chains lighting up with the same raw question. Did you see what just happened? People didn't know how to label it. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a stunt. It wasn't a feel-good viral trick. It was simply two people telling the truth so nakedly that the whole idea of content felt too small to hold it. In one apartment in Detroit, a retired auto plant worker named Charles sat in his recliner, remote dangling from his hand, tears drying on his cheeks in crooked streaks. He had tuned in for distraction, background noise while he sorted his medications for the week. Instead, the silence on that stage tunneled straight into the silence in his own life, the one he'd carried since his wife's passing 2 winters earlier, the one no check-in call from his grown kids ever touched. When Steve bowed his head and the audience rose without clapping, Charles felt something inside him loosen that had been clenched for years. He opened the notes app on the phone he hardly used and wrote 4 words. I still need help. He didn't send it, not yet, but for the first time he felt it was allowed to exist outside his chest. 2 time zones away in a small dorm room in Seattle, a sophomore named Lena, who had been Googling withdrawal deadlines because the weight of her hidden depression made each lecture hall feel like a drowning pool, clicked on a live stream link a friend sent with the single line, "Watch this." She stared at her laptop, blinking, as Jasmine read the quote about silence and a soul coming back to life. Lena replayed that sentence the way other students looped songs. 10 minutes later, she opened the university counseling portal she had abandoned 3 times and filled out the intake form. Under reason for visit, she wrote, because if I'm breathing, maybe God or somebody still has something for me to do. The network's social media team, trained to clip out the flashiest jokes and shareable sound bites, hesitated. There was no tidy punchline to cut, no catchy hook. Instead, they uploaded almost 6 uninterrupted minutes of the silence. Steve bowing, Jasmine crying, the audience on its feet. They didn't add a caption. They didn't even put the show's logo in the corner. Within an hour, that raw clip crossed 1 million views, traveling through timelines normally divided by politics and algorithms. A veteran in Florida shared it with the men from his old platoon group chat, adding, "For the nights none of us talk about." A pastor in Lagos forwarded it to his entire congregation before Sunday sermon. A K-pop fan account in Seoul translated Jasmine's words into Korean and paired them with an illustration of an empty subway seat bathed in gentle light. Hashtags popped up, but they weren't the usual hype tags. Still Breathing started trending alongside stories of miscarriages survived, of layoffs endured, of addictions fought in secret. People posted pictures of quiet places, kitchen floors, parked cars by lakes, dim garage corners, captioning them, "My silent place, still here." The algorithm built to chase outrage didn't know where to file this surge of tenderness. For 12 hours, the trending bar looked like a collective sigh. By Thursday morning, every major morning show wanted Jasmine Crockett back on, this time to talk about feelings, not filibusters. Her press secretary answered with the same line to every request. She said what she needed to say. She would like you to listen to each other now. Steve's team fielded interview offers from outlets that had ignored him for years, now eager to crown him pastor of prime time. They politely declined. Steve spent that day at home, sitting on the porch swing he'd once imagined buying when money was only a wish, the folded quote resting against his chest pocket like a second heartbeat. He called his daughter. They didn't talk about ratings. They talked about the granola bar morning and how neither of them were there anymore. Meanwhile, the executive floor of the network's headquarters wrestled with a different sensation, fear wrapped in opportunity. A vice president asked in a meeting, "How do we replicate that kind of authenticity on a weekly basis?" The room fell quiet because everyone knew the answer and no one wanted to say it. You can't. Authenticity, by definition, arrives unannounced and unrepeatable. Someone suggested a town hall-style spin-off. Someone else floated a sponsored mental health series. None of it felt right. They tabled the discussion, but outside those glass walls, the ripple kept moving. In Philadelphia, a middle school teacher named Mrs. Delgado paused her Friday lesson and played the clip for her class of 12-year-olds after two students bullied a third for stuttering during a presentation. She dimmed the lights, and for 6 minutes the chatter stopped. Afterwards, she asked, "What does silence mean for a soul your age?" One boy in the back, a kid who rarely spoke, raised his hand and said, "Maybe it means you're loading. Like a game that's freezing, but it's not broken. You just have to wait." His classmates nodded, genuine, no giggles. They wrote letters to themselves titled, "While I'm Loading." Hospitals started airing the episode in waiting rooms, unedited. Prison chaplains requested the broadcast rights for Sunday services. A crisis line volunteer in Des Moines said call volume didn't spike, but the tone changed. More callers said, "I'm not alone. I just need help staying." The volunteer wrote those words on a sticky note and placed it beside her monitor. 3 weeks after the broadcast, Steve stood in front of a community college auditorium in Atlanta for a charity event. He carried the same note Jasmine had returned to him, now framed in simple black wood. It was propped on a small table next to the podium. Before he began, he took it in his hands. "Tonight," he said, "I'm not here to motivate. I'm here to witness, because witnessing is what saved me." He told the story of Jasmine in a car, of himself in a Ford Tempo, of silence that almost swallowed them both, and the room filled with young people juggling jobs and classes and invisible doubts, listened like their futures depended on each word. Jasmine, for her part, kept working in Congress, but something shifted. Colleagues who once brushed past her began asking to talk off the record about burnout, about therapy, about faith. She started hosting monthly closed-door stillness circles in her office. No cameras, no press, just staffers who needed 10 minutes of quiet. She called it "Policy Starts with People," and the irony wasn't lost on anyone. The best policy idea sometimes begins in a room where nobody talks at all. A month turned into a season. The ratings data eventually rolled in. The episode was the most rewatched hour of talk show television that year, not because people wanted to laugh, but because they wanted permission to feel. Marketing departments tried to distill the alchemy. "Real is ratings," read an internal memo. But every attempt to force lightning back into the bottle fizzled. Another show tried to stage a similar, unscripted breakdown. Viewers sensed the artifice before the host's tears could even fall. Twitter roasted it within minutes. You can't fake the kind of stillness that grows organically from pain meeting pain and deciding to breathe together. But the most profound ripples were small, almost invisible. In a Chicago barbershop, the owner printed Steve's line, "If my words saved you once, your tears saved me back," and taped it to the mirror where teenage boys came in on Saturdays. He told every kid who sat in the chair, "You're allowed to speak and you're allowed to cry." A single mom in Albuquerque wrote the silence quote on her fridge with alphabet magnets so her 6-year-old would read it every morning. Long before she understood it, the magnets kept falling, and each time the girl picked them up, she learned the letters by heart. An engineer in Bangalore set a daily calendar reminder at 6 a.m. "God's not done with you yet." He wasn't religious, but he liked the math of it. If the app pinged, it meant he had woken up. Equation solved. On a tiny island in the Philippines, a pastor replaced the Sunday benediction with Jasmine's line, translated loosely, "Silence is not defeat. It is the night the seed cracks before it grows." The ripples were not noise. They were new currents, subtle but directional, guiding people toward each other in ways metrics could never quantify. 6 months later, a journalist finally convinced Jasmine to do a follow-up interview, not on television, but for a long-form magazine piece. They met at a small cafe near Capitol Hill. Halfway through the conversation, the reporter asked, What was the single biggest change in your life after that night? Jasmine stirred her tea, thinking. The biggest change, she said, is invisible. She looked up, eyes steady. Some mornings I still wake up tired, still feel that old question pressing on my chest. But now I hear Steve's voice answering it before I can spiral. And I hear my own voice too, telling him the same thing back. It's like we built a bridge in that silence, and we can both stand on it whenever we need. The journalist pressed. And politically? Did it shift anything? Jasmine smiled gently. Empathy is political, she said. If I walk into a hearing and remember every person in front of me might have a kitchen floor moment, I legislate differently. That's enough of a shift for me. Steve read that quote online while sitting in the green room of another studio, waiting to appear on a completely different talk show. He closed the tab, closed his eyes, and said a quiet thank you. When the stage manager knocked, he stepped onto a new set, lights bright, cameras rolling, jokes ready. But the note rested inside his jacket, close to his heart, reminding him the punchlines were never the point. The people were. Years would pass. New headlines would flood the feeds. The world would spin on with its tragedies and triumphs. Some would forget the exact date of the silent episode, even the details of who cried first. But many would remember the feeling, the hush that told them you can stop performing for just a minute and the earth won't fall apart. And somewhere in countless mirrors and phone notes and worn pockets, that truth lived on. Silence is not the end of the story. It is the breath before the next line. And as long as breath remains, the story, any story, can still turn toward light. Thought for a couple of seconds, the first lesson hits like a sudden flash on a dark highway. Pain is often invisible until someone dares to name it. Jasmine fought policies by day and nightmares by night, bleeding behind a podium no one thought to look behind, while Steve carried a comedian's grin over memories of cold car seats and breakfast he couldn't buy. Their injustice was ordinary. The injustice of being expected to sparkle while drowning. And that is precisely what makes it lethal, because the world excuses what it refuses to see. When Jasmine finally cracked open her silence, every hidden bruise on every unseen soul in that audience lit up at once. 1,000 tiny signals spelling the same truth. We are breaking in plain sight. It teaches that your colleague laughing at lunch might be planning a farewell text at midnight. Your hero on stage might be reliving hunger in a park sedan, and your own heart might be whispering help beneath flawless Instagram angles. The takeaway is brutal and beautiful. Before you judge the volume of someone's voice, measure the weight strapped to their back. Before you envy a spotlight, feel how hot it burns. In a world obsessed with surfaces, their confession was a wrecking ball to the facade, proving that dignity is not the absence of wounds, but the courage to show them. And so the first call to action is simple, explosive, and impossible to ignore. Look again, look deeper, ask twice, listen twice as long. The second lesson strikes with the precision of a sniper round. Words you throw away can become the lifeline someone else knots around their chest. Steve's quote about breathing and unfinished purpose was a passerby in his monologue, a spark he tossed into the universe and forgot. Yet it smoldered for 2 years on Jasmine's mirror, scorching back the night each time despair tried to swallow her. Injustice here hides in randomness. The unfair truth that some survive because they overhear the right sentence at the right second, while others fade in silence because no sentence arrives. That reality installs a permanent urgency in every syllable we speak. Idle chatter can transform into rescue ropes. Casual jokes can slice deeper than knives. And one offhand sentence might bloody a heart you never meet. Steve learned that the laugh line you craft today may echo tomorrow as someone's battle cry. So each phrase becomes a weapon or a wound, and there is no neutral fire. The scene commands us to treat language like live ammunition. Polish it, aim it, respect its power, because the target could be your own reflection years later, begging for a reason to stay. The moral is jagged yet electrifying. Speak as if a stranger's pulse depends on your breath, because sometimes it does. Thank you for watching until this moment, and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.